that. Hi everyone, it's great to be here again. I always enjoy coming here. I said to Pam, I'd be quite happy to come here weekly, which gives you some idea of the state of my career these days, but I seem to do a lot of talks and little money coming in, but that's all right. Store up treasures in heaven or whatever. It's wonderful to talk about The Wizard of Oz. I often talk about this, and I think I have written 2 or 3 posts on my blog about various aspects of the book, as well as Alice in Wonderland, which is another wonderful book with kind of a similar idea and many common motifs. That's also a very favourite book of mine, and I don't go too much out of children's books these days. I've given up reading books on law and other things, and all you need to know is kind of in fairy tales and books like this, Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland and The Little Prince, which is another favourite book of mine. I'm sure it is to many people here too, eh? In all of those books, there's something of a journey, something of a quest, something of a going out and a coming back, of an involution and an evolution. And we'll look more at some of these ideas. Even though they're written by, certainly the last one I mentioned, The Little Prince, was not written by a Theosophist. It was written by a very lapsed Catholic who was a Humanist. But he hadn't totally forgotten his Catholic Christian upbringing, and you find some Christian motifs in it. But it's a beautiful book about love and friendship and the things that matter. And so are the other 2 I mentioned. Any invitation to talk about The Wizard of Oz is always very special, and I'll always do it, because it's also the 75th anniversary of the release of this film called The Wizard of Oz that was made in 1939. And I'll talk a little bit about that film, but primarily I'm going to focus on the book, which is definitely, as Dr. John Algeo said, a theosophical allegory. Whether Baum set out to write one or not, it doesn't really matter, but it's theosophy all the way through. We'll come to that too. A couple of quotes. Firstly, from the book itself, The Wizard of Oz. This is straight from the book. You must walk. It is a long journey through a country that is sometimes pleasant and sometimes dark and terrible. The road to the City of Emeralds is paved with yellow brick, so you cannot miss it. We're going to talk a little bit about this yellow brick road, and there's various interpretations of it, and certainly in some sense it is the path, the quest, the hero's journey. One of the chapter headings, chapter 4, is entitled The Road Through the Forest, and there's that idea of a forest, but a road through it. This golden or yellow brick reminds one of the golden path of Buddhism. It's the archetypal pilgrimage. You find it all through all sacred literature, and in many ways The Wizard of Oz is a piece of sacred literature, sacred writing in the occult esoteric tradition. It's in many ways our spiritual autobiography. Here's a quote from Rumi. Don't be satisfied with stories, how things have gone with others. Unfold your own myth. The Wizard of Oz is very much about a myth. Maybe more than one. The book and the 1939 film for an MGM, now actually owned by Warner Brothers, long story with the studios. The book transcends culture, race, religion, creed, nationality, even age. I too am a child at heart, and in the mind increasingly. The book transcends time and space. Its message is eternal. It's been called the classic American fairy tale, and indeed it is a very American story. As John Algeo said, it's got that idea of you can do it. It's very optimistic, very positive. But it doesn't gloss over the more ugly side of life either. As it is the 75th anniversary of the release of the Judy Garland film, which I'm sure everyone's seen here. If you haven't, you must have been living under a rock, because it is one of the most viewed films ever made. Interestingly, when it was first released by MGM in 1939, it wasn't a flop, but it barely grossed enough money to pay the huge cost that MGM had spent on the matter. I think in its initial release it grossed just over $3 million, which admittedly was a lot of money in 1939, but MGM had spent $2,777,000 on it, a huge amount in that day. They'd never spent as much on a film. In subsequent re-releases of the film and its sale onto American television about 1956, it's just grossed more and more and more. Last year I saw it again for the umpteenth time at an IMAX theatre. A 3D version of it was made by Warner Brothers. It wasn't all that good, really. I mean, it's hard to take an old film and turn it into 3D. And I really wonder why they bothered. But it was effective, and maybe it had reached a wider market that way. The film at the time was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, but it was a difficult year, 1939. Guess what film it lost to for Best Picture? What other great film of all time, too? Gone with the Wind, yes. So it lost to Gone with the Wind as Best Picture, but it picked up 2 other Oscars, including Best Original Song. Can anyone guess what song it might have been? Over the Rainbow. Yes. You know, by E.Y. Harburg and Harold Arlen, who also wrote the lyrics for a few Marx Brothers films like At the Circus, Lydia the Tattooed Lady, which Groucho Marx used to sing all the time. Lydia, oh Lydia, say have you met Lydia? Yes, we can. It's a beautiful song. It's entered popular culture, this film. For example, we've all heard these quotes, haven't we? Or most of you have, I'm sure. Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. That line is ranked number 4 in the American Film Institute's list of the top 100 movie quotations in American cinema. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. Ranked number 23 in the same list. And these words that introduced Judy Garland said before she started singing. I won't sing the last 4. Somewhere where there isn't any trouble. Do you suppose there is such a place, Toto? There must be. It's not a place you can get by a boat or a train. It's far, far away, behind the moon, beyond the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. And expressions like follow the yellow brick road. Just over the rainbow, the phrase itself is the catchphrase. And we've all heard he's a friend of Dorothy. Although there's some confusion as to whether that is a reference to the actress who played Dorothy, Judy Garland, who certainly was and still is very much a gay icon for gay men. Some say it was named after Dorothy Parker, that incredible satirist and humorist and member of the Algonquin Round Table, if that means anything to anybody. She's certainly associated with a number of gay men. So possibly it was a reference to Dorothy Parker. There's so many funny lines about Dorothy Parker. If you've heard of an American president called Calvin Coolidge, it's way back. He did virtually nothing during his presidency. He preceded Herbert Hoover, who wasn't much better. And Calvin Coolidge, when Silent Cal they called him because he barely moved or spoke, when Dorothy Parker was told that the president was dead, meaning Coolidge, she said, "How can they tell?" Oh, that's wicked, isn't it? A friend of Dorothy, let's say it relates to the film, which I think, having researched it, it's more likely that it relates to Dorothy. Its origins go back to World War II, but anyway, enough of that. Toto, we're home, and this is my room, and you're all here, and I'm not going to leave here ever, ever again. Because I love you all, and oh, Auntie Em, there's no place like home. And the wizard that was mentioned there, we'll talk about the wizard. I am Oz, the great and powerful. There was a film released last year. Anybody see it with Oz, the Great and Powerful? And it wasn't bad. I mean, I think Baum would have been quite pleased with that film. It was a prequel, which means it was not based on one of the 14 Baum books that he wrote, the Oz books. Many Oz books have been written by other authors since. But it showed the wizard to be a humbug, but who ultimately kind of, it all happened before Dorothy landed in Oz. But he sort of learned a few things, and he became more useful. I mean, they needed this sort of messiah figure, but we'll talk about that later. And the wizard saying, "Silence, whippersnapper." You don't quite hear that now so much. The line I like from the film, it's in the film, not the book, is when Toto draws back the curtain, showing this man pulling all these, and he realises he's been exposed, and he says, "Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain." Here's a couple of quotes about the Wizard of Oz. I think the book rather than the film, but it applies to both. Unfortunately, the film, although it changes some things in the book, we haven't got time to talk about those in great detail. It narrows down some characters and expands the role of others. But a wonderful man who knows a bit about fantasy himself, Caleb Deschanel, who's done some wonderful films as a cinematographer and director. He says this about the Wizard of Oz: "It's a wonderful universal story. I mean, you look at the Wizard of Oz, it takes a reality, which is the beginning of the movie, and turns it into a mythology. You know, all great storytelling is a form of myth." And his daughter, who's an actress, Zoe Deschanel, says, "I would watch Wizard of Oz like every day when I was 2. I had a hard time understanding that I couldn't go into the film because it felt so real to me. And it has to so many other people as well." While I'm on the subject of the 39 film, anything else I should mention about it? Well, I mentioned Over the Rainbow. That song was ranked number one in the American Film Institute's 100 Years, 100 Songs list. It's also number 1 in the Recording Industry Association of America's 365 Songs of the 20th Century. Number 1. The film is the most viewed motion picture on television syndication around the world. So says the US Library of Congress, that has preserved the film as historically and culturally and artistically significant. It's consistently rated in the top 10 best movies of all time. I mean, if you listen to someone like Bill Collins, he always says number 1 is Gone with the Wind and number 2 is The Wizard of Oz. You're welcome to disagree with that, but it's... Well, anybody know who was originally MGM's choice for Judy Garland? Shirley Temple. And she auditioned for the role. She was under contract to Fox, and Fox was prepared to lend her out, but they listened to her singing voice, and although it was cute, on the Good Ship Lollipop, it wasn't quite the right voice for the score that had been written for The Wizard of Oz. It will be forever associated with Judy Garland. And I find myself, I almost choke up just saying that, if you know anything about the life of Judy Garland, what a sad life it turned out to be. And even towards the end of her life in concerts, she would sing that song and break down herself, and the audience would break down. It's hard to hear that song, Over the Rainbow, without feeling a sense of sadness too. For those who are not really familiar with the story, I'll give you just a very brief 10 or 12 line plot summary from the book. When I say the book, I mean The Wizard of Oz. In fact, Baum was a prolific author. I mean, that's the complete stories of Oz, and he wrote 14. But he wrote more than just the Oz books. That's fairly small print too. They're all free. They're all out of copyright, so you can just go and download them on the internet from iBooks, places like that. I like the old ones still, even though it was damn heavy to ring today. The story begins when a little Kansas farm girl, Dorothy Gale, and her dog, Toto, are blown away in a tornado and land in a fairyland named Oz. Here she meets a very unusual cast of characters: the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, known in the film as Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion, and together they go on a quest to see the Wizard of Oz, each of them seeking what they want most in life. And I think you know by now that Dorothy basically wants to get back to Kansas. The Tin Woodman wants a heart, the Cowardly Lion wants courage, and Scarecrow wants a brain. And they make their way along the yellow brick road through a series of hair-raising encounters. They arrive at the Emerald City only to be told by the wizard that they must first kill the Wicked Witch of the West before he will grant their wishes. He's just stalling, basically, because he can't grant their wishes, really. They eventually overcome many dangerous challenges and dispose of the witch, although that occurred quite by accident from memory. And then they return only to find that the wizard is really just a humbug. Nothing but a carnival barker. vaudevillian hypnotist. Not a very good one of those either. But the wizard craftily addresses everyone's wish but Dorothy's. You see, basically what he tells them is that you don't need me to give you anything. I have got nothing to offer anyway. Through the various trials and tribulations you've been through, I think that's been mentioned, you developed those very qualities. You had them in you all along. And as for Dorothy, you could go back to Kansas at any time, he said. So, there's a bit of further delay I haven't mentioned about having to knock off the good witch of the south. But eventually, Dorothy and Toto do go home, thanks to something she had all along. You might recall there's Glinda the good witch of the south, who showed Dorothy the power of the silver shoes. In the film, they were called ruby slippers. Oh, you people could come and do this. Better than me too. Once home, Dorothy realises how glad she is to be home. And as she says, and I think I read the quote, she's not going to go out again. Dorothy's friends used their brains, hearts and courage to survive, thus finding that what they each wanted, I've already said that, they had. All right, you know all about Oz. How did the word Oz originate? Where did it come from? Nothing to do with Australia, is it? No. Well, he had a 2-drawer filing cabinet. You see, one of the things L. Frank Baum used to do for his own kids and for the neighbours, every evening they'd come and he'd tell stories, generally ones that we made up on the spot. He was a great storyteller. And someone was talking about this incredible mythical land, and one of the little kids, neighbour's kids, said, you know, well, what's it called? And he hadn't thought of a name. He just happened to glance down and he had these filing cabinets. The top drawer was A to N and the bottom drawer was O to Z, so O-Z, Oz. Simple as that. Yes. Well, pressing on. I've got a jumble of papers here. I apologise for that. Although I say it's a theosophical allegory, and that's not an original thought of mine, I have no original thoughts, there are all sorts of books. I've got 12 books at home, at least, written by others, different interpretations of the book. And if you go on to various theosophical websites like the Theosophical Society in America, you'll find that John Alcio has written a wonderful lot of articles, and you'll find a few downloads too, not just on that site, but he's done some wonderful talks on it. It's one of his favourite books, you know. But there's been populist interpretations to do with populist politics that was going on at the time, Buddhist interpretations. One person's written, Joey Green, The Zen of Oz, 10 Spirited Lessons from Over the Rainbow. There's been one or more New Age interpretations, even a Christian interpretation, which I've read, which is interesting, and certainly you can sort of see that, but I think Baum would have been the last one to have written that. A secular atheistic interpretation, and that I understand from the point of view that the wizard, the god figure, turns out to be a humbug. And theosophical interpretations abound. Even Salman Rushdie, you know, the Satanic Verses, he's written a book in 1992, The Wizard of Oz. So many books about the book, the film, and its author, L. Frank Baum, who we'll have more to say about shortly. In conjunction with Warner Brothers celebrating this, Warner Brothers didn't make us say, but they own it now, because MGM basically is gone, sadly. In conjunction with the 75th anniversary of the film, apart from Warner Brothers bringing out that 3D version last year, there's been a lot of other books coming out celebrated. It's a huge thing. Myth. I've used the word myth. Many of you will be familiar with Joseph Campbell, the great American mythographer, the hero with 1,000 faces and so many others. The monomyth he wrote about, the hero's journey. In this case, we've got a female hero, a heroine, which is so wonderful, as it is in the Alice in Wonderland books. But it's us, it's you and me. And there is this idea of, you see, Kansas, Oz, Kansas. If you've seen the film, it begins in black and white. It goes to Technicolor, one of the first, if not the first Technicolor film. Brilliant Technicolor. To this day, it's very good. They never got it better. In fact, Technicolor went worse in the 1940s. It was brilliant colour. And then it goes back to black and white. Originally, it was sepia. And I've read that, you know what colour sepia is. And then they changed it, MGM changed it sometime in the 1950s to black and white, but it's more or less the same. Because it comes from that colourless Kansas from which we come and to which we return. Poor old Kansas gets a bit of a serve in that sense, but Baum in the book refers to Kansas as being in various shades of grey. We come from Kansas. We're stranded in Oz. You might think, when you think of the film, well, that's the Oz is sort of not, it's a fantasy world, it's all a dream. Yeah, it is a dream, what we're in now sort of thing. It's not the real world. The real world is where we've come from and where we're going. That's kind of the idea. And you find the same thing in Alice in Wonderland and many other books. Little Prince, who sort of comes from outer space, goes through a series of planets, initiations if you like, and ultimately finds out what he needs to know and goes back, even though it's a very humanist interpretation. Still got the same idea. And in Theosophy we talk about involution and evolution. Some have said that the four characters, Dorothy and her three friends, are really that archetypal fourfold classification. You've got the mental level, the thinking, you've got in the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, it's our emotional or affective nature. The Lion, who wants courage, it's kind of action in the physical plane or will. Dorothy comes from the word Dorothea, gift of God, divine gift, sort of the human soul or spirit. Some say, they represent the four kingdoms, plant, vegetable, mineral, animal. It's hard to say. But one thing is clear, Dorothy travels in a company and she develops the various powers that she needs. Yeah. You want it warmed up?
Yeah.
We can't, sorry. You're welcome to borrow my coats over there. Well, Dorothy travels in company, and I think there's an important lesson there that while we have to stand on our own two feet using our own silver shoes or ruby slippers, as in the 39 film, it's only in company of other human beings, in relationships, that we can ultimately develop fully. Glinda, the good, appears as some sort of a pantheistic oversoul or overspirit, but perhaps also represents the teacher within, representing inner spiritual intuition, that still small voice that says to us, this is the way. Dorothy, I mentioned, means divine gift or gift from God. It's kind of the soul. She has no earthly parents. She's got an Auntie Em, and I've forgotten the uncle's name all of a sudden. Yeah, I think so, that's right, yes. Some wonderful lines. One I didn't mention was, in the end, there is this expression, where in the world did you come from? The final chapter of the book is chapter 24, Home Again. I'll read it. Auntie Em had just come out of the house to water the cabbages when she looked up and saw Dorothy running towards her. My darling child, she cried, folding the little girl in her arms and covering her face with kisses. Where in the world did you come from? From the land of Oz, said Dorothy gravely. I'll come back to that. And here is Toto too. And oh, Auntie Em, I'm so glad to be at home again. In some of the writings and tapes of John Algeo, he's placed a fair bit of weight on this. Where in the world did you come from? And said Dorothy gravely. It may sound a bit silly and perhaps a little bit strained, but the author was a great punster. Rarely did he choose a word which was gratuitously thrown in. He really thought it through. From the land of Oz, said Dorothy gravely. It's kind of like it's been some sort of a death, a burial, as a result of a descent. But now, she's kind of like being born again. She's come back. Not born again in any fundamentalist sense. And she says, and I have Toto too. Who does Toto represent, do you think? First of all, the name. A lot's been written on that, and we really don't know for sure. It certainly was a popular boy's name at the time in France and some other European countries. Some say Toto, T-T, teetotalers, which had teetotalers in America, of which there were quite numerous at the time, who had aligned themselves with the populace. And Baum had a great interest in American politics and so on. Possibly. But who or what does Toto represent? Some say it represents some sort of intuitive, instinctual, animal-like part of us, which is an important part of us. We must not neglect it and just concentrate on the soul. Or
that won't fit in there.
you want me to hold it?
Yeah, but I'll get the other. Just hold that.
Can I talk a moment? Yep, okay. Right, some say it represents that instinctual animal-like part of us or our body. Certainly, we must not neglect that. It's not just enough to bring our soul or spirit back. What of the yellow brick road? I have more to say about that, but you know, Krishnamurti said truth is a pathless land, and I've often thought a lot about that and write often about it on my blog. Truth is a pathless land. I thought, well, any land must be capable of having a path on it. I think I know what he's trying to say. See, a path suggests a geographical, spatial separation between, say, point A and point B. You need a path, a road of some sort to get from here to Newcastle, unless you fly. But even then, you've got a path, in a sense, in the air. Or in the sea if you go by boat. But if you see truth as being... truth as being something that is all around us, life, reality, some call it God, then this truth, we couldn't be said we're in direct and immediate contact with it. Just as I'm looking at you and you're looking at me, we're in direct and immediate contact with each other. We don't need a path to go from one to the other. And that is not just my view, and you don't need to share it, but I think it was Baum's view very much. He talks about the path and the road through the forest, but essentially what the book seems to be saying is the Krishnamurti idea that truth is all around us and in us, and we don't need a wizard or anything like that to mediate truth to us. So in a sense, that yellow brick road is a metaphor, but it's not really a path at all. This is not to denigrate, the theosophical idea of a path or a quest. It just gives it a slightly different meaning. As I say, a path implies distance and separation, but I don't think Baum saw that we were in direct and immediate contact with truth. Well, we've alluded to the fact, and my person introduced me spoke about Baum and a Theosophist. He was born in 1856 in Chittenango, New York. He died in 1919 in Hollywood, California. A bit like me, who just done a lot of things, that's true, but none of them all very well, or any well at all. He was everything, and he basically failed at most of the things he did, except when it came to writing children's books. He was an author, a newspaper editor, an actor, a playwright, a screenwriter, a stage and film producer. You can find on YouTube some very early films that he produced and directed. An impresario, he was a husband and a father, and yes, a theosophist. We all know the TS was officially formed in New York City in November 1875. It was only about 20 years later, 1897, that Baum and his wife joined the Theosophical Society, or a branch of it at the time. They sent their children to ethical culture, Sunday schools, and ethical culture has something to do with humanism and Unitarianism. It's aiming to teach morality without religion. Baum himself was originally a Methodist, but a very sceptical one. He'd make a good Unitarian if he wasn't one. He later joined an Episcopal church, but that was only so he could participate in church theatricals. And you know, in all the 14 Oz books, there's only one mention of a church. Can anyone elaborate on that? And it's in The Wizard of Oz, only one mention. And in fact, if you saw that film with James Franco, the Oz, the Great and Powerful, you would see it. A small little dainty miniature church in the dainty China country. And the Cowardly Lion accidentally treads on it and smashes it to a million pieces. Something quite obvious there. I mean, Baum's attacks on conventional religion were less than subtle. It is quite amusing, yes. That's the only one, a porcelain church, which suggests porcelain not really real and so brittle, and the Cowardly Lion accidentally walks on it and smashes it to pieces. Delightful irony there. And yes, the wizard himself, that God figure, or at least some people's idea of God, which clearly wasn't Baum's idea, was nothing but a carnival barker, a fake magician from Dorothy's hometown in Kansas, nothing but a humbug. And he had skinny little legs too. We'll talk about the balloon ride shortly. Theosophy in the book, it's everywhere in the book. I'm just sort of watching the time. It's everywhere in the book, and I haven't got time to sort of refer to all aspects of it. Let me just, in no particular order, just throw a few little motifs at you. There's a reference to, just trying to find in my many notes here, an apple orchard. Dorothy's first stop on the yellow brick road is an apple orchard. I can't recall if this is in the film or not. I'll have to watch it again. As she gambols into the orchard with the scarecrow on her arm, the viewer is treated to a brief glimpse of the wicked witch of the West behind a tree, kind of like the serpent, watching the new Adam and Eve enter. The apple orchard's an obvious sort of stand-in motif for the Garden of Eden. But here it's quite different from, say, the Christian or biblical version of the fall, which itself is, I think, a myth. Myth as in the sense that it's telling something more important than just to be taken literally. See, in this case, instead of biting the apple and dooming the human race, supposedly, the trees themselves prevent Dorothy from getting the fruit when she plucks one. So evil, if you like, prevents the fall. The witch appears and drives them from Eden with her fire, which again is a reversal of the Eden myth, where the Lord sets a fire to prevent anyone from entering before Dorothy can eat the apple. So in this kind of retelling of the Garden of Eden story, Dorothy, and not the serpent, comes out on top. There's no belief in total depravity or original sin or any sort of condemnation at all. As I mentioned before, the whole tale can be seen to be an allegorical story of the soul's journey from Oz into Kansas and back to Oz, involution, evolution, etc. In the book, Oz is said to be surrounded by a deadly desert of shifting sands. John Algeo says that in the teachings of Theosophy, there's a reference to the shifting sands. Maybe someone can help me there where that reference might come from. It's kind of referred to as the ring pass not between the etheric and other dimensions. It's interesting that we get some insight as to what Baum might have meant by the shifting sands surrounding Oz, because it's said that, and I've read this in a couple of biographies about the man, that as he lay on his deathbed, his last words reportedly were, "Now we can cross the shifting sands." Yes, Oz is the world of samsara. It's always a world of becoming, always changing. I mentioned that Dorothy has no earthly parents. Perhaps her Auntie Em is the great world mother, the archetypal feminine. So it's been said. I've spoken about Kansas as kind of the infinite nirvana, the void, the unknown, unchanging reality, pure being. Oz is that strange, unreal world that we find ourselves in now, a world of materiality and sensation, titillating and interesting and satisfying but unsatisfying, scary at times and not so scary at times. And there is that idea too, if you like, of Platonic or Neoplatonic idea of a crucifixion, of a spirit being crucified on the cross of matter into materiality before being freed and resurrected and going back home. It's clearly in there. And Baum believed in all that, and karma and reincarnation. I think the one important thing to take away perhaps from today is that this world of Oz, as Baum sees it, is in one sense, yes, something that we will enter into when we die. Perhaps not immediately, but at some stage in the future. But I think he's also saying it's a world that's not bound by time and space. It's a world we can enter at any time, even in this life. If we want to. We don't have to wait till we die in order to enter this other world. It's a state of consciousness or mind or being which we are at one with being itself. When we come, as the liturgy of one church, Liberal Catholic Church, when we come to know the self with a capital S, the big self, the true self, as one. As I mentioned before, in one sense, the reason why it may be a pathless land is that yellow brick road leads nowhere which is not already here and now. In one sense, there's no place to go because we're already there. This problem, that's a problem word too, just using the word there, because that too suggests space and distance and separation and place. We only need to realise that we live in the eternal now. Anyway, I could move on, must move on. There's a cyclone, as you know, which brings Dorothy into Oz. It's been seen as a karma, or just what is necessary to bring about the act of involution, and it spirals upwards, it's said. The Emerald City, maybe that's a jewel in the lotus. Was the Emerald City really green? You know the bit about the green glasses and everything? Let me just read something that I've written from one of my posts on my blog. Forgive me for being a bit self-indulgent. The Emerald City really is green, I said in one of my posts. It's not all that clear in the book The Wizard of Oz. But in subsequent Oz books, the author L. Frank Baum, having changed elements of the storyline more than once, made it unambiguously clear that the Emerald City really is green. There's no need for those special green spectacles to be worn to make it look green. You might recall in The Wizard of Oz, the first book, which was, yes, written in published in 1900, it was said that the bright greenness of the Emerald City was so great you had to have these glasses on, you know, but it really is green. It's not just white, made to look green. As I said, they were told that they needed these green glasses, but that was a hoax, as I think are the claims of conventional religion. That's what Baum seems to be saying. John Algeo, in a wonderful article, The Wizard of Oz, The Perilous Journey, says, the green glasses are like the dogmas that religious wizards insist their followers adopt. Where? So that their ecclesiastical cities, don't take that too literally, will look green and vital. The joke is that the Emerald City really is made of emeralds. It really is green, quite naturally. Religion really is what it says it is, a place of treasures and marvels. But the humbug wizards who have got themselves put in charge of it, this is Algeo speaking, I think it's beautiful, the priests and ministers, they have no faith in the natural value and greenness of their city, so they require the unnecessary and artificial spectacles. But all they do is distort reality. The emeralds, and this is me writing now, the Emerald City is green. There's no need for special green spectacles to make it look green. That reminds me of studying philosophy as an undergraduate. The lecturer would say, the sky is blue. The sky does not become any bluer because you believe it to be blue. Further, the proposition the sky is blue does not become any truer because you believe it to be true. I'm not quite sure what the analogy was there, why I said that. Just want to get in a little bit of realism there, Andersonian realism, I think. The point about it is this, the world really is green. We don't need those special glasses to see it. You see, if we're in direct and immediate contact with truth, all we need to do is to perceive it. Beliefs and dogmas and thought coverings. A Buddha once said, he referred to them as avanas, a Sanskrit word which is kind of like, it didn't have them then, but like a Venetian blind. And you pull it down or one of those funny mirrors at Luna Park that distorts reality, Belief You remember what Krishnamurti said about belief and conditioning, don't you? And I've written in my blog, Bugger Beliefs and Dogmas. They're a menace, a total and impenetrable barrier to true knowledge and wisdom. I think I quote the Buddha who said, if you want to know and understand, don't believe, for if you believe, you'll never know and understand. That's not to say I don't have convictions and affirm certain truths and principles, but they're ones that I've come to know and understand through the experience of life and using reason and a few other things. But beliefs and dogmas, which are someone else's version of truth, well, I think they're for spiritual cripples. The president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Reverend Peter Morales, said religion is not about what you or I or Baptists or Catholics or Jews or Muslims or Hindus believe. I would even go a giant step further. Belief is the enemy of true religion. Let me repeat that. Belief is the enemy of true religion. So pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. The balloon ride. I've mentioned the balloon ride. You know, there's this skinny-legged magician in this story that promises a ride in the balloon full of hot air. I mean, again, Baum is satirising traditional religion. And this skinny-legged wizard, who turns out to be nothing but a humbug, is promising a trip to the divine hot air balloon. Toto, of course, plays an important role here. What did Toto do here? Just as Dorothy was going to get in there, well, I think she was already in the basket, wasn't she? And Toto jumped out, and she went to get Toto. In the book, Toto actually drags somehow Dorothy out. Toto was right to force Dorothy out of this silly nonsense balloon. Otherwise, she might never have found her way back home to Kansas. In other words, found truth and enlightenment, whatever your interpretation be. So I think Toto's saying to us, listen to your intuitions, your gut feelings, your still small voice. Those brief momentary bits of imagination and intuition that appear seemingly out of nowhere. Yes, the wizard is clearly a stand-in for not just the Christian God, but all anthropomorphic concepts of God. And even beyond that, for example, if you look up chapter 10 of the book, Dorothy actually asks someone at the palace, what is Oz like? Before I get on to that, that delightful line, it's in the film, it's not in the book, no one has seen the wizard. And Dorothy says, Judy Garland says, well, how do you know he exists then? That little child that says, no one has seen God, as the Bible says. Well, how do you know he exists then? Well, what is he like, says Dorothy in the book. That's hard to tell, said the man thoughtfully. You see, Oz is a great wizard and can take on any form he wishes. So that some say he looks like a bird. You must know of some religions where that is considered to be God as a bird or something. Some say he looks like an elephant. That's ruminant. Some say he looks, I'm not trying to poke fun of any particular religion here because he's very even-handed at all of them. Some say he looks like a cat. Cats, ancient Egypt, divine. To others he appears as a beautiful fairy or a brownie or in any form that pleases him or pleases us. But who is the real Oz is when he's in his own form, no living person can tell. That is very strange, said Dorothy, but we must try in some way to see him or we shall have made our journey for nothing. It's clearly saying, the author, that we must listen to the voice within, voice of the silence. No grace from beyond as such. We have to listen even to the barking of a dog called Toto. We grow and evolve and learn to know and come to know and understand through trials and tribulations. I think Krishnamurti was right when he said we have to be our own teacher and guru and our own pupil or disciple. And that's not to say, I firmly believe there's a role for teachers. Otherwise, I'd be a bit of a humbug if I'm not one already. Teachers can point the way. Teachers can be useful if they can say to you, look within. That's a very useful teacher that can say that and can say that the wizard is a humbug who can say, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. That's very important to have a teacher like that. So, I'm not denying teachers. But no teacher or guru can actually give you truth. They can only give you their version of truth. That's so important. I must finish soon, in about 5 minutes. One book, the final book in the Oz series, Glinda of Oz, here's Baum. He gets more and more theosophical directly. He introduces some characters called the Adepts. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Beings who have acquired supernatural powers through studying the occult laws of nature. These beings are said to guide the spiritual evolution and transformation of humanity, even indeed the whole universe. So Baum clearly believed in ascended masters or something like that. He believed in a world that was ordered, a world that was fair and just in an ultimate cosmic sense. The wizard, you see, represents those false teachers and gurus who pretend to be spiritual masters, but they haven't even mastered themselves. Just a couple of quotes I want to finish with. One's from Manly P. Hall. I'm sure some of you have heard of, if not most, or all. Hall said, the forces opposing the essential progress of humanity are always embodiments of the three great enemies of humanity: ignorance, superstition, and fear. Ignorance is the state of insufficient knowledge. Superstition is addiction to that which is untrue. Fear is our anxiety over the consequences of our own actions, being the victim of the collective conduct of our own kind. The Wizard of Oz is a book of hope. As I said, it's a very American book, but it's not just that. Otherwise it would never have been loved as it has been loved across all countries and cultures. But it is a book of hope that everything can be okay. Just on my Facebook this morning, some quote came in from, I think, the Unitarian Universal Association that quoted the actor Christopher Reeve, the one that had that devastating horse accident, and he became a Unitarian later in his life too, after years of atheism and other things. And he said, once you choose hope, said Reeve, anything's possible. And that's kind of, I thought to myself that I must mention that because I think that's relevant to this book today. Truth is all around us. It, whatever it is in us. It is us. May we all come to know this self as one. For there's no place like home. And you will admit it, it's a very good thing to be alive. Another quote from the book. Bless you all, and I'm happy to take questions. And I hope I haven't gone too long.